The number one team in the country is Texas. They made it a tight race at the end of the early signing period, adding the number 2 athlete Michael Terry on National Signing Day and 5-star defensive lineman Justice Terry, no relation, 2 days later. That is the good news. Bad news, the Longhorns, they have to replace 4 new starters on the offensive line as the Arch Manning era officially begins. Here's Hank South of Horns 24/7.
Texas had a big finish to the class of 2025 in the early signing period. Really big last week, flipping Cade Phillips, who ended up a 24/7 Sports 5-star from LSU. Big get at cornerback that the Longhorns did hold a commitment from earlier in the cycle. He flipped to LSU. Texas was able to get him back late. Obviously signed their other 24/7 Sports 5-stars with Jonah Williams and Khalil Lockett. And then the biggest news of the signing period was landing Justice Terry, the 5-star defensive lineman from the state of Georgia, in what was a big upset over the Georgia Bulldogs. A lot of people had him pegged to end up in Athens. He chose Texas. His commitment actually pushed Texas over for the number 1 ranked class over Georgia, the first time Texas has achieved that ranking in the 24/7 Sports era. So, on top of all that, Texas also landed Michael Terry, who's a top 100 athlete from San Antonio. So Texas had a big finish in the early signing period to secure that number 1 class.
Thank you to Hank. Certainly a lot of joy in Longhorn country coming in with a number 1 class. It feels good to be number 1 at anything, but it feels pretty good to know that Arch Manning is your quarterback going into next season. What kind of team does he have around him?
I asked this at the top of the show. Is Sark the next Nick Saban? 25-5 over the past 2 years. You look at year 1 in the SEC, 7-1 record. They make the league championship. What made Nick Saban who Nick Saban was? They lost a lot every year to the NFL, but there was never any type of drop-off. And when you look at Texas, this is what they're going to lose. Quinn Ewers, 4 of the top pass catchers on offense, 4 starting offensive linemen, 6 starters on defense from a unit that finished 3rd in scoring defense. I think we all think they're going to still be in the college football playoff conversation, and that is because Steve Sarkisian is recruiting his butt off, and he has been since he's been there in Athens. Number 1 class, first time ever in UT history. Last year they finished 6th. The year before that, 3rd. The year before that, they were 5th. Like, this group is ready to go. Certainly some questions at that wide receiver position. We're big believers in Ryan Wingo, former 5-star. We saw him as a true freshman. They add 3 guys from the high school ranks: Khalil Lockett, Jamie French, Dalen McCutcheon. Those are some of the more productive wideouts and more established pass catchers in the 2025 cycle. So what has he got in front of him? A lot of new faces, right? That's kind of been the theme of this show, but these are some talented dudes that can certainly get open for him.
My biggest question mark is Arch Manning, right? You think about Arch Manning. I think a lot of his decision to go to Texas, not only because he wanted to bring that program back to national championship status, but you think about the Mannings and how deliberate they are in the process and decision-making process, the ability to protect Arch Manning. You talked about it. 4 of the 5 starters that have been there for quite some time, they're gone. Kelvin Banks, Cam Williams, Jake Major, staples of bringing this Texas program back to the heights of which we've seen over the last couple of years. They're gone. And now you got the golden boy taking position. I hope they can protect him. And they got some young guys that they like. Now they have their opportunity. They've gotten their feet wet a little bit, but can they protect him? That's going to be up to Kyle Flood. I don't really worry about the skill position. I don't really worry about Tashard Choice, what he's got at the running back position. The other thing, you flip it over to defense, right? You look at the defensive line. Vernon Broughton, Alfred Collins, the guys that they've lost there, those are big deals, right? And Benda, Jade Barron, Andrew Makuba, these are all Sunday guys. And like Andrew said, they've done a really good job of backfilling their roster with top 5 recruiting classes. But what's it going to look like? Cole Brevard comes over from Purdue. Travis Shaw comes over from North Carolina, former 5-star that really hadn't put it all together yet. What does that look like? Hiro Kano, right? A guy that we were high on coming out, international prospect from California by way of Ohio State. So Texas is kind of in a similar but more concrete position than Florida. When I was talking about Florida and talking about DJ Lagway and that opportunity, right? You got 2 years of Arch at most. More than likely, I would bet that Arch is going to be there 2 years. But do you have everything around him? And I think Texas does. My biggest question is offensive line.
When you look at this recruiting class as a whole, it's hard to hone in on one person in particular because you got 4 or 5 stars, you've got 10 out of the top 100, 15 out of the top 247. But I really want to ask you about Jonah Williams because he's somebody that you put as the number 1 player on your freaks list, saying that he could have a legit chance to be a first-round draft pick in Major League Baseball and also in the NFL draft. So what is it about him that makes him so freaky?
Well, he might be a once-in-a-generation type of athlete. No,
we don't have to go there.
Just with his multi-sport background.
Freaky,
we've gone back and forth like trying to find a player comp for Jonah Williams. And, I think Kyle Hamilton is what we've settled on. And Cooper always brings this one up. Malachi Starks, who was also my number 1 freak a few years ago. Now he's going to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. But it's really that position versatility, what they're going to be able to do with him, not only on defense, but on special teams as well. Like, I'm so confident that they are going to find a way to get him on the field. And what I think is kind of crazy about Jonah Williams is like he is playing baseball this spring for the UT Longhorns, which is a pretty good baseball program.
Right now?
Yeah, this spring he's participating in baseball with them. So he's one of one. Like, I don't know if we're going to come across another guy like this. I think he offers alignment flex. I think on special teams, you can use him in a variety of different ways. We'll see if the NCAA ever decides to change the kickoff rules. But what we've seen in the NFL, these big creatures that can run fast for 40-yard spurts, like those are valuable on kickoff. So he's just a really special talent and, someone that I'm really excited to see. The other thing I want to bring up on Texas, and I had this written down, Arch's first start is at Ohio State.
Ooh.
He's also got to go to Florida, and he's also got to go to Georgia in year 1. And we just mentioned, that offensive line, new look unit. Just kind of found that interesting.
I think the good thing with Arch is that he's gotten the opportunity to start a couple games. And I think if you're Sarkisian, obviously it is a very difficult situation to navigate when you have 2 players that are ranked number 1, not only at their position, but number 1 prospects in their entire country. And I think if you were Steve Sarkisian, think about all the possibilities that could have gone wrong with handling a Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning. I think they kind of handled it beautifully. And for Arch to be able to get the starting experience, use him situationally as a runner, which quite honestly, his emerging presence as a runner is probably more than we ever thought coming out of high school. I think they've done a good job getting him ready. And the other thing is, people are going to say, well, he's the number 1 prospect in the country. Why wasn't he ready to play over the last 2 years? Arch Manning played two-way football in New Orleans. For him to sit and develop on his own timeline, get acclimated to the speed of the SEC, I think has been a huge plus for him. And I think he's going to be ready for these environments. Now, does that mean that they're going to win a national championship in year 1? I don't know. But I think he's ready, and I think his time is now.
The other thing, we didn't have him on the graphic for the ins and outs with Texas. Hey, CJ Baxter's back. That's another 5-star that was injured this past season. I think that is huge for the offense as it kind of rebuilds. And you said it, there's no reason to be concerned about the playmakers there, but that is a massive addition. Just him healthy and ready to go in 2025. That's going to make things easier for Arch Manning and that new look offensive line.
You mentioned finding not necessarily the new Nick Saban, but who on the recruiting trail would maybe step up in his place, because obviously they would leave a massive hole. And this is Texas's first time as the number 1 class. So does this signify some sort of change among the elite when it comes to these recruiting classes?
I think recruiting has just changed so much, and it's gotten to the point where there isn't really regional recruiting as much. I mean, you have the ability to go into different pockets, and Texas still is going to recruit in their backyard. I think what's notable about them is they go into Georgia and they get Justice Terry. They go into Florida, they get Cedric Baxter. They get Jamie French. When Alabama, Nick Saban was there, obviously I live in the Sunshine State. The rule of thumb was whoever Nick Saban wanted in the state of Florida, he usually got. He took those guys away from the big 3. So I don't know if Texas is there just yet, but I think they're knocking on the door. I think that brand has only gotten bigger and bigger. And at the college football playoff push, Arch Manning taking over, it's going to keep UT in the spotlight. They're going to have an excellent NFL draft. A lot of guys, yes, players want to be compensated on Saturdays for what they're doing in college, but at the end of the day, you also want to make the NFL, right? And Steve Sarkisian's going to have a bunch of guys making money in the league.
I think there's more 3D chess in college football than we're privy to. And what I mean by that is Justice Terry, 5-star, one of the last guys to commit, was between Georgia and Texas. If he goes to Georgia, Georgia is the number 1 ranked team in the country. If he goes to Texas, it ends up being Texas. Texas is the number 1 ranked team in the country. We just talked about all those defensive linemen. We talked about the need in the middle, and sure, they got Elijah Griffin over there in Athens. But they don't miss on those guys, right? We've seen USC try to go down there, take guys out of the Peach State. That doesn't happen much. So for Texas, Steve Sarkisian to be able to pull a guy like Justice Terry coming off a playoff run and then having a quarterback with the last name Manning, and then the first year post Nick Saban to say, we are the new flagship school of college football. And listen, Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, everybody's going to have their claim to that. But on the recruiting trail, that's some pretty good ammo there for Steve Sarkisian and company. So, we like to think it's all about good players. It is. But for Texas, however much money Justice Terry cost them, it wasn't just Justice Terry. I think there are a lot of things at play that probably motivated that as well.
Texas finishing with the number 1 recruiting class in 2025. You can read up more on the top-ranked Longhorns on horns247.com. Our partners there have you covered on all things Texas.